No one warned them that the war would arrive quietly. Not with explosions this time, not with sirens or speeches on the radio, but with a knock, soft enough to ignore, and terrifying enough not to. By the spring of 1945, the German town of Breitenfeld barely resembled a place where people once lived normal lives. Streets that used to echo with bicycle bells and church songs now carried only the sound of wind moving through broken windows. The air smelled of damp stone, smoke, and something else harder to name, exhaustion maybe. Anna Keller woke before dawn the way she had every day for weeks. Hunger did that to people, so did fear. She sat up slowly on the narrow bed, listening. The town was quiet, too quiet. Beside her, on a mattress pulled close to the stove, her 7-year-old son Emil slept fitfully. Or at least she hoped it was sleep. His breathing came in shallow pulls, uneven, like he was climbing a hill even in his dreams. Anna reached out and pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. Too warm, her stomach tightened. "Emil," she whispered, "it's Mama." His eyelids fluttered but didn't fully open. She dipped a cloth into a tin cup of water, precious water, measured down to the last swallow, and laid it gently across his brow. The cloth warmed almost instantly. Once, before the war swallowed everything, Anna would have carried him to a doctor, a proper one. A man with clean hands and white sleeves who smelled of soap instead of smoke. Now the clinic was rubble. The doctor had disappeared months ago, and the last German medic had left with the retreating army 2 nights earlier, unable or unwilling to look her in the eye as he muttered that there was nothing more he could do. Anna didn't blame him. Everyone was running out of things to give. She rose and crossed to the small window, careful not to wake Emil. The glass had been replaced with cardboard after the last bombing, but a narrow crack let in the gray light of morning. Breitenfeld was stirring. A few figures moved slowly along the street, neighbors wrapped in coats that no longer kept out the cold. No one spoke. They rarely did anymore. Words felt dangerous, like they might summon bad luck. For days, rumors had moved through the town faster than any army. The Americans were coming. Some said they were already nearby. Others said they'd passed through towns like this and left nothing but chaos behind. The radio, when it still worked, had painted them as monsters for years. Tall, ruthless men who hated Germans simply for breathing. Anna had listened. She disbelieved. What choice did she have? But now, standing there with her child burning up behind her, the stories felt thin. Fear had competition. A low rumble reached her ears. At first, she thought it was thunder. Then the sound grew steadier, heavier. Engines. Anna's heart began to pound so loudly she was sure Emil would hear it. She leaned closer to the window crack and froze. Down the main road, shapes emerged through the morning mist. Trucks, painted a dull green, marked with white stars that stood out against the gray world like something unreal. American. People stepped back into doorways. Shutters slammed. Somewhere, a woman gasped sharply, then went silent. Anna backed away from the window. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her hands pressed flat against her apron, as if holding herself together. This was it. The enemy they had been warned about since Emil was born. The men whose planes had roared overhead, whose bombs had shaken the ground beneath her feet. She turned toward her son. Emil stirred, his face pale against the dark blanket. He coughed, a sharp, rattling sound that made her chest ache. And this time, when he turned his head, a faint smear of blood marked his lip. Anna crossed the room in 2 steps. "Oh no," she breathed, wiping it gently. "No, no, stay with me." His eyes opened halfway. "Mama," he murmured, "is it morning?" "Yes," she said immediately, forcing warmth into her voice. "The sun is coming up." It wasn't a lie exactly. The sun always came up. It just didn't feel like it anymore. She helped him sip from the cup, counting each swallow. When he was done, she held his hand and stayed very still, listening to his breathing even as her mind raced. If the Americans searched houses, if they took supplies, if they took people. A knock echoed through the small house. Anna flinched. It wasn't loud, not angry, just firm enough to be heard. She didn't move. The knock came again, closer this time, like a question being asked politely but without room for refusal. Her thoughts collided all at once, warnings from the radio, whispered stories from neighbors, memories of soldiers marching through town years earlier with confidence that felt unbreakable back then. And beneath it all, one simple truth: if Emil didn't get help, he might not last the day. Another cough escaped him, weaker than before. That decided it. Anna stood. Her legs trembled, but they carried her to the door. She paused with her hand on the latch, breathing once deeply. If they are what they say, she thought, then we were already lost. She opened the door. Two soldiers stood on the step. They were younger than she expected. One held his helmet under his arm. The other wore a white armband marked with a red cross. A medic. They looked almost unsure. The medic spoke first, his German careful, practiced, but clearly learned the hard way. "We are checking for civilians," he said. "Anyone who needs help." Anna searched his face. She had expected coldness, anger, something sharp. Instead, she saw tired eyes, concern, humanity she hadn't been prepared for. "My son," she said, her voice breaking despite herself. "He is very sick." The medic nodded immediately, as if the decision had already been made before she spoke. "May we see him?" For half a second, fear surged again, the kind that tells you to protect what's yours at all costs. Then Emil coughed behind her. Anna stepped aside. The war had taught her many things. One of them was when there were no good choices left, only necessary ones. And as the American medic crossed the threshold into her home, Anna Keller realized something she never thought she would. For the first time in weeks, she felt something that almost resembled hope. She opened the door expecting the worst. But when the American medic stepped inside, he moved like someone entering a sick room, not a battlefield. Slow pan across a dim, half-broken room. The small house smelled of damp wood, thin soup, and the sour edge of fever. The stove barely gave off heat. A single candle struggled against the gray morning light. And in the middle of it all, Emil lay curled under a worn blanket, his breathing uneven, his cheeks too flushed for a child who hadn't played in weeks. The medic stopped a few steps in, as if he didn't want to bring the outside world too close to the bed. His companion, the other soldier, stayed near the door, quiet, watching the street through the opening like he knew the danger might not come from Anna, but from someone else. The medic took a slow breath and looked at Anna. "I am." "Jim," he said, tapping his chest lightly. "Medic." His accent bent the word in a strange way, but the meaning landed clearly enough. Anna didn't offer her name, not yet. Names felt like trust, and trust was something the war had drained out of people like blood from a wound. She simply pointed. "My son, Emil." Jim nodded and moved closer, setting his small medical bag on the floor with care. He opened it as if it held something sacred. Inside were bandages, vials, a stethoscope, and a few small packets Anna didn't recognize. Anna's eyes fixed on that bag. It looked full. Her mind flashed with a bitter thought: so this is what it looks like when someone still has enough. Jim knelt beside Emil's bed. He didn't touch the child right away. First, he leaned in and spoke softly, not in German this time, but in a warm tone that didn't need translation. "Hey, buddy," he said. "You hear me?" Emil's eyelids fluttered. He didn't fully wake, but his lips parted as if he was trying to answer. Jim glanced up at Anna. "How long fever?" Anna swallowed. "Many days, 4, maybe 5. Jim's face tightened just for a moment. He reached for Emil's wrist gently, feeling for a pulse, counting under his breath. Then he placed the back of his hand against Emil's forehead and frowned. He pulled out a small thermometer and looked toward Anna, gesturing. "Mouth," he said, then pointed. Anna understood. She helped Emil open his mouth and guided the thermometer in. Emil barely reacted, and that frightened her more than the fever itself. While they waited, Jim listened to Emil's chest with the stethoscope. The metal touched Emil's skin and Emil flinched slightly, but Jim's hand was steady, careful. Anna watched every movement like she was trying to memorize them. The American soldier at the door spoke quietly in English. Anna caught only a few words. One sounded like lieutenant. Jim answered without looking away from Emil. His voice was calm, but something in it sharpened like a warning wrapped in politeness. Anna's throat went dry. So there was an officer nearby. She understood enough about armies, any army, to know what that could mean. Rules mattered, supplies mattered, and civilians, especially enemy civilians, rarely mattered at all. The thermometer beeped. Jim pulled it out and read it, his eyebrows lifting. He said a number in English, then repeated it slower like he was translating for himself. Very high. Anna clutched the edge of the blanket. Can you help? Jim didn't answer immediately. That pause, that single second, was brutal. It felt like the whole room held its breath. Then he nodded once. Yes, just one word. But it landed in Anna's chest like warmth. Jim opened a small packet and poured powder into a cup. He asked for water, and Anna hesitated, embarrassed by how little she had. Still, she brought the tin cup and watched him measure it as if every drop mattered. He mixed the powder slowly, then helped Emil sip. Emil swallowed, then coughed weakly. Jim steadied him, patient, waiting until the coughing eased. What is it? Anna asked. Jim searched for the German words and didn't find them, so he tried another way. For fever, he said, then placed his hand over his chest. To help breathing. Anna didn't know if she believed in miracles anymore, but she believed in action. In someone doing something instead of shrugging. Jim pulled a small vial from the bag and looked at it like he was deciding whether to cross a line. His eyes flicked to the soldier by the door. The other soldier shook his head slightly, not in protest, more like fear, like a man who could already see trouble forming down the street. Anna caught the tension, even without understanding the language. What is wrong? She whispered. Jim exhaled and leaned closer to her, lowering his voice. Not enough, he said, tapping his bag. For soldiers, for war, this, he gestured toward Emil, this is not orders. Anna felt her cheeks flush with shame she didn't ask for. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to be the reason someone got punished. But then Emil made a thin sound, almost a whimper, and her instincts rose like a wall. I don't care about orders, she said, her voice shaking. He is a child. Jim looked at her, and in that moment Anna saw something she recognized. Not hatred, not victory, just the same tired human weight she carried, the kind people carried when they'd seen too much and still had to keep going. Jim nodded once, as if agreeing with something deep inside himself. He drew up a small injection with practiced speed, then paused again, looking at Emil, looking at Anna. Okay, he asked, pointing to Emil's arm. Anna's mouth was dry. She forced herself to nod. Jim gave the injection gently, then pressed cotton to the spot. Emil barely stirred. Anna's eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Not yet, not in front of strangers, not in front of the enemy. Outside, the street shifted with movement. Voices rose and fell. Boots passed the window. For a moment, Anna imagined the whole town watching, not just her, but what this moment meant. An American medic saving a German child. It felt impossible. Jim packed the bag again, but not completely. He kept a few things out and placed them on the table like he was leaving a small lifeline behind. He pointed to the cup. Give small, often. Then he pointed to Emil's chest and made a slow breathing motion with his hands. If worse, you come, find me. Anna blinked. Where? Jim hesitated. He spoke to the soldier at the door in English, and the soldier answered with a quick glance outside. Jim turned back. Square, he said. Truck. Red Cross. Anna nodded, trying to hold onto every word. Jim stood and looked down at Emil for a long moment like he didn't want to leave yet. Then he turned toward Anna. Name, he asked again, softer this time. This time she gave it. Anna. He repeated it carefully. Anna. It sounded strange in his mouth, like he was carrying something fragile. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a wrapped piece of candy, slightly crushed, the kind Anna hadn't seen in years. He placed it on the table without ceremony. For him, he said. Anna stared at it, stunned. A tiny thing, a meaningless thing maybe. But in a town where children had forgotten sweetness, it felt like a promise. Jim and the other soldier stepped back toward the door. And as they did, Anna heard a voice outside, louder than the others, sharper, filled with authority. The soldier at the door stiffened immediately. Jim's shoulders tightened. Anna didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Someone important was coming, someone who might not approve of kindness. Jim met Anna's eyes, and for the first time his calm expression cracked just slightly. "Stay inside," he murmured. Then he opened the door and stepped out, straight into whatever was waiting in the street. The voices outside didn't sound angry. That almost made them worse. They were controlled, measured, the kind of voices that belonged to men who didn't need to shout to be obeyed. Anna stood frozen beside Emil's bed, listening as boots stopped just outside her door. She caught fragments of English through the thin wood-clipped sentences, a question, then silence. The kind of silence that follows a decision. Her eyes drifted to the small pile of medical supplies Jim had left on the table. Proof. If someone decided to look inside, there would be no denying what had happened here. Emil shifted, letting out a weak sound. Anna immediately knelt beside him, smoothing his hair, whispering nonsense words just to keep him anchored. Her heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. For a moment she imagined the door flying open, imagined hands pulling Jim away, imagined the kindness being corrected, erased, punished. But the door stayed shut. The boots moved on. The voices faded down the street. Anna let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time had a way of stretching when fear was involved. Emil's breathing began to settle, still shallow but steadier, less frantic. Anna noticed it slowly, like someone easing into warm water. She leaned close, watching his chest rise and fall, counting again. This time the numbers didn't feel like a countdown. Outside, the town shifted. Doors opened cautiously. Faces appeared in windows. Whispers slipped from house to house like smoke. They helped her child. An American. A medic. By midday, Anna heard a soft knock at her door. She flinched, then frowned. This knock was different, lighter, familiar. When she opened it, Frau Bauer stood there, wrapped in a shawl that had once been blue. "I heard," the old woman said quietly, eyes flicking toward the bed. "Is it true?" Anna hesitated, then nodded. Frau Bauer's mouth trembled. "My granddaughter," she whispered. "She hasn't eaten in days." Anna's first instinct was fear. Not of Frau Bauer, of what this meant, of attention, of consequences. But then she looked at Emil, at the faint color beginning to return to his cheeks. "There's a truck," Anna said slowly, "in the square with a red cross." Frau Bauer squeezed her hand like it was a lifeline. That afternoon, Jim noticed them. He was standing beside the medical truck, sleeves rolled up, his movements quick but controlled. The square had become a strange place, half occupied, half waiting. American soldiers leaned against vehicles, smoked, checked maps. German civilians hovered at the edges like birds, unsure if the field was safe. Jim spotted Frau Bauer first. She was leading a small girl by the hand. The child's head was shaved unevenly, her eyes too big for her face. She leaned heavily against her grandmother, every step an effort. Jim stiffened. He glanced around at the soldiers, at the nearby officer speaking with a local man, at the supplies stacked neatly in the truck. Then he stepped forward anyway. By evening there were more. Not a crowd, not yet, just a handful of mothers, a father with a limp, a boy holding his side like he was afraid to let go. They came one at a time, quietly, carefully. No one asked questions out loud, but everyone understood the risk. Jim worked with a focus that bordered on stubbornness. He rationed his supplies with painful precision. A tablet split in half, a bandage reused where it could be, water shared sparingly. Every decision was a calculation, not just of medicine but of consequences. His fellow medics noticed. "You're pushing it," one of them murmured in English as Jim cleaned his hands. "This isn't what we're here for." Jim didn't look up. "They're sick." "That's not the point." Jim finally met his eyes. "That's exactly the point." Word reached Lieutenant Harris before sunset. He stood near the edge of the square, watching as Jim wrapped a child's arm with surprising gentleness. His jaw tightened. "Corporal," he called. Jim straightened slowly. "Yes, sir." Harris nodded toward the civilians. "Explain." Jim chose his words carefully. "They needed help, sir." Harris exhaled through his nose. "You have limited supplies." "Yes, sir." "And they are not American." Jim paused. "No, sir." Silence stretched between them. Anna watched from across the square, Emil bundled against her chest, her heart hammering. She didn't understand the words, but she saw the posture, the power imbalance. The way Jim stood, not defiant but unyielding. Lieutenant Harris looked at the child in Jim's arms, then at the line of women waiting quietly, eyes downcast, hope flickering despite themselves. "This ends when we move out," Harris said finally. "You do not advertise this. You do not encourage it." Jim nodded. "Understood, sir." Harris hesitated, then added, quieter, "Be quick." He turned and walked away. Jim let out a breath and went right back to work. That night, Emil slept for 4 hours straight. Anna sat beside him the entire time, afraid to move, afraid to believe. His breathing was still rough, but the fever had eased enough that his skin no longer burned her hand. Outside, distant music drifted through the town, an American radio playing something slow and unfamiliar. It mixed strangely with the night sounds, weaving itself into the broken streets. The war hadn't ended, but something had shifted. In kitchens and cellars across Breitenfeld, mothers whispered the same thing to one another. "The enemy helped my child." And with every whisper, the old stories, the ones built on fear alone, grew just a little weaker. By the third day, no one pretended anymore. The square no longer felt like a place to pass through quickly with your head down. It had become something else, fragile, unspoken, but real. A place where fear and hope stood side by side, watching each other closely. Anna noticed it first in the mornings. She would step outside with Emil wrapped in her coat, his weight still too light, his steps still slow, and she would see other mothers already waiting at the edge of the square, not forming a line, not daring to. Just standing far enough apart to look casual, close enough to understand why they were there. Some nodded at her, some didn't, but their eyes said the same thing: "You were right." The American truck with the Red Cross arrived just after sunrise, now as predictable as a habit. Jim jumped down from the back, his movements tired but practiced. Dark circles lived under his eyes. His smile, when it appeared, was brief, like something he couldn't afford for long. Children recognized him before the adults did. A small boy with a bandaged knee waved one morning. A girl clutched the wrapper from a piece of candy like it was a treasure. Laughter, quiet, surprised laughter, slipped out sometimes before people remembered where they were. It startled them every time. Anna watched Jim work and realized something that unsettled her. He wasn't acting like a conqueror. He was acting like a neighbor. Frau Bauer brought bread one afternoon. Real bread, somehow saved from somewhere. She placed it on the edge of the truck without a word and stepped back. Jim hesitated, then broke off a piece and shared it with the other medics. No speeches, no thanks that drew attention, just a small exchange of understanding. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It crept in. A glance held a second longer than before. A hand no longer pulled a child away when an American passed. Someone daring to say "dank" out loud. Anna noticed how the soldiers reacted too. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked relieved, like they'd been carrying a weight they hadn't known how to set down. A few avoided the square altogether. War made rules. Humanity tested them. Emil grew stronger each day. His fever stayed away. His appetite returned in small, hopeful bites. One afternoon he laughed, a real laugh, when Jim made a ridiculous face while checking his chest. Anna turned away quickly, pressing her fingers to her mouth. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed that sound until it came back. Not everyone healed. That was the truth no one liked to say out loud. An older man with pneumonia didn't make it through the night. A baby arrived too late, her small body already quiet by the time Jim reached for her. Each loss left a mark. Jim washed his hands longer afterward, sat alone on the truck step with his head bowed. The other medics said nothing. There were no words left that helped. Anna stood beside him once, unsure what to do. After a moment, she placed her hand lightly on the edge of the truck. "I'm sorry," she said. Jim nodded without looking up. "Me too." The Americans received orders on the 4th day. They were moving east. The town buzzed with it, not loudly but urgently. Fear crept back in around the edges of hope. What would happen when they left? Who would help then? Anna felt it like a tightening in her chest. That evening she found Jim packing supplies with quick, efficient movements. "You're leaving," she said. Jim nodded. "Tomorrow." She looked at the truck, at the red cross, at the space that had become a quiet center of survival. "What about the children?" Jim paused. His jaw tightened. "I did what I could," he said gently. "I wish it was more." Anna swallowed. "You gave us back more than medicine." Jim looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was seeing the whole town through her face. He reached into his bag and handed her the last of the powder packets. "For Emil," he said. "And if someone else needs it, you'll know." She took them with both hands like something fragile. That night the square filled with people. Not a crowd, not a protest. A gathering, mothers, fathers. Children wrapped in coats too big for them. They stood in the open under a sky finally clear enough to show stars, watching the American truck idle quietly. No one spoke at first. Then Frau Bauer stepped forward. She didn't say much, just a simple sentence, her voice thin but steady. "You saved our children." Silence followed. Jim shifted uncomfortably. "We just did our job," he said. "No," Anna said softly, surprising herself by stepping forward too. "You did more." Jim looked away. One by one, people nodded. Some wiped their eyes. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier. The truck engine started. Jim climbed into the back, then paused and looked down at Emil. "Stay strong," he said. Emil nodded solemnly, clutching the candy wrapper in his pocket like a medal. As the truck pulled away, Anna felt the weight of the war settle back onto the town. But something had been left behind. Not supplies, not promises, proof. Proof that fear had lied to them. And as the truck disappeared down the road, Anna realized the hardest part wasn't surviving the war anymore. It was learning how to remember this moment when the world tried to tell a different story. Years passed before Anna Keller found the words for what had happened. At the time, there was too much rebuilding to do. Roofs to patch, fields to clear, lives to stitch back together one careful day at a time. The war receded the way storms do, not all at once, but slowly, leaving behind scars you learned to live with. Breitenfeld never went back to what it was. No place ever really does. But children grew, streets filled again. The church bell rang once more, its sound uneven but determined. And Emil lived. That alone felt like a miracle. On quiet evenings when the radio hummed softly in the corner and the day finally loosened its grip, Anna would catch herself thinking about those days, about the olive trucks, the red cross painted on metal, the way fear had sat in her chest like a stone, and how something unexpected had cracked it open. She never saw Jim again. She didn't know where the road took him. Didn't know if he made it home or if the war claimed him the way it claimed so many others. There were no letters, no photographs, just memory. But memory turned out to be enough. Emil remembered him too, not as an American, not as a soldier, just as the man who knelt beside his bed and stayed. When Emil grew older, he asked questions about the war, about enemies, about why people hurt one another in the first place. Anna answered as honestly as she could, always circling back to the same quiet truth. "War teaches people to forget," she told him once. "But some people refuse." In Breitenfeld, stories were passed down the way all important stories are, softly, across kitchen tables and front steps, without ceremony. About the days when fear loosened its hold just long enough for compassion to slip through. No monuments were built, no medals were given, but children lived. And sometimes that's the only legacy that matters. Long after uniforms faded and borders shifted, that memory remained, not of victory or defeat, but of a moment when humanity crossed a line the war insisted should never be crossed. The war took many things from Breitenfeld. It took homes. It took certainty. It took years no one would ever get back. But it didn't take everything. Because in the middle of all that destruction, when it mattered most, someone chose mercy over orders, and a town carried that choice forward, quietly, for the rest of their lives. And if this story stays with you, maybe that's why. Not to remember the war, but to remember what survived it. Some stories don't end when the fighting stops. They settle into people. into the way they raise their children, into the way they hesitate before believing the worst about someone they've never met. Anna never told her story loudly. She didn't need to. She saw it carried forward in quieter ways, in Emil's kindness, in the way neighbors helped one another without being asked, in the understanding that enemies are often something we're taught, not something we discover for ourselves. History books will tell you who won and who lost. They'll name generals. They'll mark dates. They'll count territory. But they rarely stop to count the moments when someone chose to see a human instead of a uniform. This was one of those moments. And if it moved you, if it made you pause or think differently or remember someone from your own past, then don't let it end here. Share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. Someone who remembers, or someone who needs to be reminded. Because long after wars are over, these are the stories that decide what comes next.